I said, Dad, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, I'm going to go with the circus. And he said, well, you might as well go and get it out of your system. You'll be home in 2 weeks. That was 72 years ago.
Being the owner's daughter, if somebody left or quit or was sick, I used to get thrown into a lot of situations that probably shouldn't have been, but that's what I did. I was expected to fill in wherever necessary. So I can say I did just about everything on the circus.
If you're a show owner, if you love a show, you're be on the lot with the show. That's where the money is and that's where the people are, and you thank them after a Monday night, okay?
Good morning, I'm Tim O'Brien, and I'm the moderator this morning. With me is Kathy Mayer. You may have heard of her. She's the executive director of the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport. And as you know, they went through some weather-related issues. They're still going through a lot of weather-related issues. But today we're going to talk just very little bit about the museum, but then mostly about Barnum himself. You've heard the word humbug related to Barnum himself. What does humbug mean? Well, let's go right to Barnum's own words. Kathy, how did Barnum define humbug?
So now remember, it's 150 years ago, so we define words very differently today, but Barnum's definition of humbug, in my opinion, the true meaning of humbug is management tact to take an old truth and put it in an attractive form.
And I'm as confused now as I was before, but anyway, humbug. And also, let's talk about the myth of the man.
Yeah.
You hear, Barnum and Bailey's circus. You think Barnum was always involved in a circus, but in fact, Barnum didn't even use the word circus in most of the shows that he had throughout the years. He was more involved in just shows. And Kathy, talk to us about the evolution of his shows and some of the names
Sure.
that he used, and how he came about actually getting into the circus, because there's a lot of myths about the man of how he got into all this stuff. So could you explain that a little bit?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's really true. Now, many of you probably, might know the real truth about Barnum and all of his endeavors. But for those of you that don't know, the circus was Barnum's retirement project. People know that? He was just about 61 years old when the idea of a traveling show came to him. He was out in the Midwest. What got him to that point was, for those of you that don't know, he was a huge champion of social and civil rights, and he was speaking on the floor of the Connecticut General Assembly as a Connecticut legislature for the town of Fairfield, not Bridgeport. And a note was handed to him, and all it read was, the American Museum was in ruins and total destruction was certain. As it turned out, according to the New York Times, on actually just the other day, July 13th, it's believed that Southern sympathizers actually burnt the museum down because of Barnum's emancipation beliefs. So here you see the first terrorism in New York City actually happened to Barnum's American Museum. And he built a second museum just up the street. It burned down from a boiler failure. He built the Hippotheron on 14th Street. New York is moving uptown now. It was barely open weeks and it burnt down. And it's really at this point, his buddy, Horace Greeley, very important American figure, said, take this as a sign, my friend, and go a-fishing. And that's when Barnum decided to travel out west. From that point, it's there that he actually meets circus promoters to get involved in a major traveling show. And Barnum actually said it would revive my love of my museums. And every show, and you can see this in the illustrations, there's always a big top, there's multiple tents, there's always a museum tent traveling with the show, and always a fine arts tent traveling with the shows. And there were always exhibitions of that caliber. So what the show is actually called, and this is letterhead, and it's hilarious because in the Barnum Museum collection, we have many, many, many letters from this epic in Barnum's greatest show on earth. But I can't even keep in. Let me give you a couple of names. P.T. Barnum's Great Traveling Moral Exhibition of the Wonderful World. That's 1872. P.T. Barnum's Great Museum and Menagerie and Circus. That's the only time you see circus in the title. But I love this one. P.T. Barnum and Company's Greatest Show on Earth and Great London Combined Circus, a traveling school of universal knowledge. So put that on my letterhead. So there's so much more to him than we could even comprehend. So to try to get that on my letterhead today, right?
This portion of the Jackpot Junction today is about Tony Steele. So what am I doing up here? My name is Paula Blackweller. I am a former flyer. I worked with the Farfans. I worked with the Eagles, Brian Miser. Worked for Circle Itaide, worked with Jay Cochran, Kennywood Park, Epcot doing kayaks. And then I became a writer. And John Zimmerman was my first coach, my first catcher. And we both live in Haines City, Florida. And he contacted me one day and he said, Paula, you need to come do a feature story on this guy who lives with me. Okay, so I put it off for a while. He contacted me again. So I went out there and it was Tony Steele.
How old were you, Tony, when you started in the circus?
How old was I? Are you sure you can hear this? I can't hear it.
I can hear you.
I was 15 years old and I left home with my mother's blessing and went to Gainesville, Texas, where they had a community circus. Like they have community theater, they had a community circus. And every winter, the Gilgray Circus would come and winter at the fairgrounds there. So I walked up to Mr. Gray one time and I said, Mr. Gray, I would like to be with your circus as a single trapeze artist. And he said, very good, go over there and see Shorty and he'll tell you what to do. So I went over and he gave me a paintbrush and he said, you can start by painting these wheels there. And as soon as you're finished, come back and see me because I got a whole lot of other stuff you can do also, you know. I said, what about the trapeze? Yeah, we'll get to that. So anyhow, I worked as Paula said, as a gazoonie. And a gazoonie, as far as I understand it, is a roustabout, a person who works for the circus but doesn't have any real circus skills, you know, acrobatics or juggling or anything like that. And I did that for about a month. And then I had an opportunity to perform, and they sent me over to wardrobe, made me a costume, and sent me out, and I performed, and I was 15 or 16 years old at that time, and there was a lot of people in the audience my age, so I went over very well. And Mr. Gray called me in the office and he said, wonderful, you're not going to be doing any more gazoonie jobs. You're not going to be doing any more gazoonie jobs, but you're going to be a performer. And not only that, but you're not going to be getting the usual $15 a week that you're getting, but you're going to get $100 a month, something like that. And I said, no, sir, I'm going to get $300 a month. And the reason was because I was angry because they never paid any attention to me in the first place. And so I got it, and that's how I get started. I originally got in the Guinness Book of World Records for doing a 3.5, which had never been done before. The most was a triple. And there was one young boy that said to me, hey, you do 3, why don't you do 4? And of course, mentally, it was impossible to do 4. And then along came Miguel Vasquez and did 4. So there's really no limit to anything.
It's been great. But through the years, different people could be recognized as circus fans because they have a camera around their neck and they're taking pictures all over the place. And I think it was at that time that Bill Taggart was looking out of the ticket wagon and saw me. And I'd like to introduce now, in all his vast immensity, Bill Taggart.
Thank you, Gordon. All right, well, all the gates are open for the big show. Tickets go on sale. The sideshow's on running. They're selling cotton candy on the midway. Mr. Fisher is the grease joint. Mr. Fisher at the grease joint is saying, doggy, 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 hot dog man. They're already hot. A very nice man. There were a lot of nice people on that show. Now, if you read my articles in the Bandwagon, you'll realize that I didn't write about the circus stars, the big acts. I wrote about the working men, the working people, and the horses. I always wrote about ordinary people on the show. There were stars and lots of articles about them, but I didn't pay much attention to them. Well, we had Eunice there, we had Elzana there, we had all the great acts. All right, can you hear me now? Yep. But it was a good show to be on. The Ringling Show, I went on the Ringling Show in '53. I sold the last ticket in 1956. The show was going downhill. The reason the show went downhill is because Johnny North had fired Art Consello. He fired Art Consello in 1953 because Johnny North wanted 55 elephants, and Consello says you don't need 55 elephants. 15 elephants will do the thing. And years ago, I went up here to Northampton, and I saw the Cole Brothers Circus, and the big mount came in with 15 elephants and Freddie Logan, and it thrilled the crowd. Okay. Now, there was a wonderful horse on the Ringling Show. His name was Harold. I write about him in every article. He was a big Appaloosa horse. He was bought by Paul Eagles from the Algie Barnes Show to go on the Ringling Show. And he died right after the Ringling Show closed. But you used to see in my movies, you see him going down the road with 55 elephants walking behind him. And he wasn't scared of one of those damned elephants. If they ran away, he'd go get them. Okay, where do we want to go next? Ask me a question. I got to take my breath.
When you started with the show and later on you were well known with the officers, you got a job in the office. And in the middle of the night, you would have to go out and get a pizza for John Ringling North.
No, I did not. I did not. I used to have to go from Madison Square Garden after the show was over that night over to the Waldorf Astoria to give him the count for that night. John Ringling North very seldom came to Madison Square Garden. He very seldom came to the show. The man, the Ringling that was on the show was his brother, Henry Ringling, and he was very, very important. He knew the working man. He'd say hello to everybody. He'd stand by me and watch me sell tickets at the come in or the blow up, whenever it was, and he never said a word. He kept his mouth shut. Now on that show, you had to make money. They didn't pay you a lot of money. My first job was $14 a week. I took care of 3 horses. Now you ran a Flash and Diamond. But then I got up to about $35 a week when I moved to the ticket wagon. But in the ticket wagon, you had to make sure every night that your count came out right and you had the right amount of money, and you better have some money in your back pocket for yourself because you had to pay the porter on the train. You had to pay Curtis the cookhouse waiter. You had to pay every time you turned around, didn't you, Chuck? In 1956, Rudy Bundy called me up or got a hold of me and said, Bill, we'd like you to go up to the Paramount Hotel in New York and be the secretary to the general agent, Paul Eagles. And I went up there. He was a wonderful man. I worked with him in January, February, March till the show opened. Now the show got ready to open. They were getting ready to pull out of the basketball was going out of the garden, and they had to put dirt in. But all of a sudden we got a call that the dirt was not going to be delivered. The Teamsters Union threw a fit. Art Kinsella, when he was the manager of the show, he made sure the Teamsters Union got about $10,000. I don't know where he got it, but he got it. But Johnny North, Kinsella wasn't there, and Johnny North said, I'm not going to pay that money. Well, as a result, the dirt stayed over in New Jersey. Lloyd Morgan had to put phony stuff down for the show to go on. They threw picket lines around the circus, and they said the circus, everybody's out of work. It kind of hurt business, but we finally got the show on, and we moved them from there to Boston. They put on a free show against us up in Boston, and then we limped across the country to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then on July 16th, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Rudy Bundy arrived on the lot. He was white as a ghost. He came over and said hello to me and my best friend Edna Antes, the ticket distribution lady, and he said, Bill and Edna, I got to tell you, the show is closing tonight. Well, that was a shock. We were heading back to Sarasota, and as someone said, Johnny North, I don't think he came on the lot. He stayed at the train, and he was all upset, from what I hear, all the way back to Sarasota. He felt that he'd let his family down. Well, he did. He should have been on the goddamn show. That's where an owner of a show belongs. You belong on the mud and you with the people, right? That's where he should have been. But he was too good for that. But David Hammerstrong wrote a nice book about him, and that's all I can say about that. Okay? But if you're a show owner, if you love a show, you're be on the lot with the show. That's where the money is, and that's where the people are, and you thank them after a Monday night. Okay? I'll tell you another story. Merle Evans used to come in the bandwagon in the big band top every night, every afternoon in the morning. His wagon was, with his trunk and everything, was opened up. The instruments were all, the band guys were sitting around, and Merle would say, well, fellas, it beats working to be here. You're lucky to have a job on this show. And those 30 guys would get up and play that 2.5 hour show, and by God, you better get out of the way, because they'd run you down heading to the cookhouse. There were some wonderful men there. Okay?
And I'd like to introduce the one, the only, the great Ward Hall. Thank you. I appreciate that, and thank you, Rick. I have to tell you that Rick has been a true friend of mine. I still call him Rick. And one of the things, if it wasn't for Rick, I would never have been able to have been inducted into the Ring of Fame. It started, first of all, one before I got in the circus. When I was just a child, I was living with an aunt, and I did not get to participate in any sports activities because my aunt was a music teacher, and if I had spare time, I had to practice on the piano. And I became rather proficient, and I learned to read and write music, which didn't help me right away, except that when I was 12 years old, my aunt booked me with a children's opera company, and we did an operetta called Old King Cole, and Ward Hall was playing the lead part in that operetta. Anyway, so much for that. By 1944, my father had come and abducted me once more and took me to Denver, Colorado. And we were living about 2 miles from the circus grounds when Cole Brothers Circus came to Denver. And so I did not run away to join the circus. I walked from where we lived out to the circus grounds. And the first person I asked for a job. Now realize this was 1944. It was right in the middle of the war. There were no people to hire for anything, but here's this punk kid who didn't know anything, and it wasn't a big kid, but they gave me a job on the prop department. And so I stayed there for as long as I could, but then I had to return to Denver because that was my first year in high school, which I did not like. And so after about a month, I simply just didn't go back to school anymore. And my job was in 1944, I was 14, I was a prop boy. Later on in that same year, actually it was by the spring of 1945, a man by the name of Larry Sunbrock brought his circus to the National Coliseum for the stock show. And the title of that was very interesting. Sunbrock's Super Colossal Wild West Show and Hollywood Thrill Circus Combined. My gosh, that must have been a great show. And he advertised the acts he had. The Wallendas on the high wire. Clyde Beatty with 40 trained lions and tigers. The Flying Cancelos. And the list went on and on. Every big name in the circus business. Of course, the problem was he didn't have any of them. So he gave me a job. He said, "What can you do?" I said, "I want to be a clown." "Oh, that's fine." He said, "I'll give you $35 a week, but you pay your own." Okay, that's fine. So now, how do I become a clown? I had been on the Cole show, and I met some of the clowns, but I was never permitted to go into their dressing room, and I didn't know how they changed to put whatever was on their face. But I knew they used something. So I made a guess, and I went to the store, and I bought a can of Crisco. And I greased my face with the Crisco. I don't think it made me funny. I think it made me look hideous. But anyway, there was a fine gentleman there, he and his wife, Hank and Dot Keenan, who were Wild West people, and he was a rodeo clown and the only clown on the show. So he took me and one other local kid, and he made us into clowns for that time. Well, of course, the show opened on Sunday against the law in Denver, and then he decided that they needed the bill post, so they went to town and put cards on all the telephone and light poles in downtown Denver. Illegal bill posting. Then he had an old covered wagon and had rented some oxen, and he hooked that to it, and he ran that up and down the streets, parading without a license. So he was in trouble right from the start, and then they got him, of course, after the show opened with that pathetic performance, and it was false advertising, misleading, and so on and so forth, and they put him in jail for about the 4th day. And so now the show couldn't go on because they closed the show, and people had to get a refund for tickets they had bought. And Larry's wife, Mrs. Sunbrock, who was one of the most beautiful women I thought I ever saw in my life, and she went and got Ward Hall and took him out to the box office and installed him in the box office and gave them a big bag of cash money to refund to the people who came with tickets. Well, a little later on in my life, I probably would have swung with the bag, but at that time, I gave them a good count, and that was my second thing. So now that summer, I also went up to town nearby, and saw Daly Brothers Circus. And the spring of 1946, by then I was 15, they had an ad in the billboard. They wanted a magician, a Punch and Judy, and a fire eater for the sideshow. Well, that's fine, because I don't want to be a working man anymore. So I wrote them a very nice letter. Of course, I didn't tell them that I was only 15 and that I didn't have a clue as to how to do any of the things they were advertising for. But they sent me a telegram, and I can quote it verbatim. I asked for $30 a week salary, eat in the cookhouse, and sleep on the train. And the telegram said, salary okay. Show opens April 1st, Winter Quarters, Gonzales, Texas. Join anytime. Wonderful. Except where the rooming house we were living, the lady that ran it didn't give me the telegram. She waited till my father got home and she gave it to him. And he looked at that and he said, well, what in the hell is this all about? I said, Dad, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. I'm going to go with the circus. And he said, well, you might as well go and get it out of your system. You'll be home in 2 weeks. That was 72 years ago.
I think we have a question in the back here.
Hey, Ward, can you tell us a story about giving the Cadillac away with the candy fish?
Okay, this happened on the Algie Keller Miller Brothers show, 1959. Ione Stevens had the concessions. I was making the candy pitch, for which I got a percentage. And every day I'd get a little stronger and a little stronger. So finally I came up with this. Ladies and gentlemen, today, when you buy your box of candy, don't just take the candy out and throw the box away, but look in the box very carefully to see if you have a yellow coupon that tells you that you have won a Cadillac automobile. Because each week here at the circus gives away a new Cadillac DeVille automobile. And if you have that yellow coupon, look in the box, see if you have it, and if anybody has the yellow coupon, bring it right over here to me, and an executive of this circus will take you to your local Cadillac dealer, and you'll be driving your new DeVille before this day is over. Now, we haven't given the Cadillac away this week yet. It's already Thursday. That means you have a very good chance. Well, of course, the hands went up like crazy. 25 cents a box. Ione Stevens was delighted. So was I, because it really gave us a big candy sale. And I got by with that, I think, for 2.5 days. It was on the third day. And Dory came to me, and he said, you know, Ward, I don't have a grift show. I have a Sunday school show. I have never had grift. And giving away a Cadillac that you're not going to give away with a 25-cent box of candy, that sounds too much like grift. So don't you do it anymore.
Like I said, elephants have been a part of my life. I've started riding in the show when I was about 5 years old, and that was always my favorite thing. I was kind of a jack of all trades, a master of none. I walked tight wire, I did trapeze, I did web and ladder, of course, rode horses, worked elephants. I can't say that I was ever very good at any of it, but being the owner's daughter, if somebody left or quit or was sick, I used to get thrown into a lot of situations that probably shouldn't have been, but that's what I did. I was expected to fill in wherever necessary. So I can say I did just about everything on the circus, from making cotton candy to picking up the trash to my husband and I had the cookhouse one year, and because our cook had left, and we always prided in feeding all our people quite well and figured if their tummy was full they would be happy workers. So my husband Gary, many of you probably don't know him, he's a wonderful guy, wasn't in circus business at all. Met him at the University of Oklahoma, had a degree in civil engineering, and he couldn't even imagine what he could do on a circus, but he spent a year in Vietnam during the war, and when he came home he wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do, and so my dad said, well, just come with us for a while. So we went with the show, and that was, you know, we've been married for 45 years, so that was quite a while ago, and still there, but he's been very instrumental in building the show, improving equipment, and never really got much credit because he walked in the shadows of D.R. Miller, but it never bothered him. He was always proud to do that, and he's home now. He didn't even come here, but I didn't mention him earlier, and I was sorry that I hadn't, because he's been a very important part of Carson and Barnes. But we still do have a lot of fun, and we get into a little mischief, and I can tell you about a time, and we were at an Indian reservation up in South Dakota when I was a child, and I don't know how they got into it, but my dad got into it with the chief, I guess, and they'd been having a powwow, and they'd all been drinking, and I don't know if there was any fisticuffs involved, but with my father there very well could have been. And that night during the teardown, this wagon, you've heard this story, Charlie? No. This wagon started circling the tent as the guys were tearing down, and must have been about 12 or 14 little kids in the back of this wagon, and the chief's wife was driving this wagon being pulled by horses, and these little kids were just pelting all the workers trying to tear the tent down, and they just kept circling, you know, for about an hour. I mean, there's just stories like that you just wouldn't believe it could happen. Why he went to a 5-ring show is just because he always wanted the biggest circus out there. And like I said, my grandfather, my Uncle Kelly, always wanted a small show, but for Dad, bigger was better. And in order to get another quarter out of them, we had a Wild West concert. And we had Chief Keys, was one of our Indian Native Americans that did knife throwing and whip cracking. We also had the Eagleman family, which you all know Freddie Logan. His wife was part of that troupe, and they did Indian dancing and whip cracking. And we had a gentleman named Shorty Shear that was a Western star, and he did rope spinning. And we would have two times in the show where we would all run in on horseback, and I don't know who I was. I was some stunt girl or something from Wyoming that and what I did was collect the tickets after the show, and that was one of the hardest jobs I ever had on the show, was going up in the seats before we had the kind of seating we have now. They were just stringers and jacks, and you had to go up on these and try to collect either a quarter or 25 cents from some of these people that really, you know, didn't want to leave. But we also had famous people. We had Tim McCoy that worked for us, and also Sky King that had the television show. He worked for us, and our tent that year was just riddled with holes because he did he shot clay pigeons in the tent, and we had a big cardboard, or not plywood platform they would pull up that was supposed to stop all this buckshot and everything, but it didn't, and the tent was just riddled with holes. But he sang. He had a beautiful voice. His I remember he sang Mariah, the wind they call Mariah. He had a beautiful voice, and he used to sing a couple of songs, and then he would do this shooting act. And one time he had Mr. McCoy, he had a hard time getting on his horse when he was there. It was a tall white horse, I remember, and they used to he'd get up on the front of the bumper of the truck, and they'd hoist him up on this truck, and he really liked to have his martinis. And he would have my family supplied him with a trailer, and somebody cleaned his trailer, and we treated him like a star, and which he was. And he one time this terrible dust storm was coming. You could see it just rolling in from the distance, and I went by and I said, Mr. McCoy, would you like for me to shut your windows down for you? The dust storm's coming. And he said, well, that would be very nice, Barbara. And he's sitting in his lounge chair with his martini and his white outfit, and the dirt is just blowing everywhere. And I guess he'd had more martinis than he should have, because he didn't really realize what. So my folks tried to always teach me to be. We didn't do anything on the circus that we didn't ask anyone else to do, and so that meant that we picked up the trash or we did whatever. And I worked on the front door with my grandfather when I was about 12 years old. And he was going blind, and I'd walk up and I'd say, Granddad, it's Barbara, so he would know who it was and it wouldn't embarrass him. But people could come up with a 5 or a 10 or 20, and he would know just exactly what change to give them. He never, and when we first started having sponsors, of course they got a cut of the gate, and he had a cash register out there, and it had a little fake back on it. And he would push the big bills back up into this little fake hole, so then when the sponsor came by and he counted out the cash, he always had a little that he'd pull that drawer out and get the money out. And it probably didn't amount to, they would have $10 or something they would have gotten off the percentage, but it just killed him to give up any percentage of it.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hey, Charlie, you and I were talking to Baraboo about Ted Bowman doing the End Elephant Act. Is there any pictures of him? I'd like to see him in his uniform or whatever he did. Did anybody ever seen? Charlie, can you tell me about that?
Oh, I've watched him work, but I don't know that I have any pictures. But when you had 5 rings of elephants, a lot of people worked them that probably shouldn't have been, and Ted was one of them. I loved him more than anything, and he lived with us for years, and he was a great asset to us, but he was the star for a while there working elephants, and he got a big kick out of it. But like I say, when you have 5 rings of elephants going at the same time, you probably have people in there you shouldn't have had. He was a bookkeeper, a wonderful one, but not much of an elephant man. I just have to tell one Ted story, and I wish he was here to tell it, because he can certainly tell it a lot better than I can. But my dad, for some ungodly reason, took out something called the Whale Show. Do you remember? Did you ever hear about that, Ward? Okay. We had this, I think Manuel King must have come up with this paper mache whale with broom whiskers or something, and they had it mounted in a trailer along with probably Manuel's mummy that you could see the writing. The newspaper was from Mexico that they'd made it out of, but Ted Bowman was the manager of this operation, and so they had got run out of several towns, and the fish had all died. It had this whale, and then it had in the backdrop kind of like an aquarium type thing, and the fish had all died. So Ted went down to the local 5 and Dime, Woolworth or wherever, and got some fish, and he came back to the show, and about the same time the sheriff arrived and was telling them that, I don't know, was telling them that they probably should leave town. And so Ted said he talked to the sheriff, and the sheriff was a little upset, and he told him he better get this piece of crap out of town. And the guy told him, the sheriff said, we've got more fish than this down at the Woolworth store. And Ted said, oh, no, you don't, because I just bought them all. So my dad was, and my grandfather and my uncle, they were showmen to the end. My dad certainly didn't want to have his funeral until his circus came home. And so when he passed away in McCook, Nebraska, the only other funeral home besides in my hometown that I knew happened to be in Denver, Colorado, and we were going to Littleton the next day to show. And so my husband and the girls and I went down that morning. He passed away that afternoon. We went down that morning, picked out a nice wooden casket because DR already had his casket picked out and paid for. It was a bright, shiny candy apple red with gold all over it. And so we bought this nice wooden casket, and they came from Denver and picked him up, and we had a service in the tent in between two shows. We had a beautiful funeral. The sisters were both there, Sister Priscilla and Sister Joe, and our minister came in from Oklahoma. A lot of people came in, and we had a service right in between the shows. And then they put my dad in cold storage in Denver. And after the show came home, we flew him home, and we had the most wonderful funeral. The whole town turned out. They suspended school for the day. All the businesses shut down. They
closed Walmart.
Yeah.
Have you ever?
We had a circus parade. He was pulled in a horse-drawn carriage. The elephant carried his flowers out to the cemetery. We had a band, and Charlie led the circus band in a wagon. It was a marvelous occasion, and I think he would have been very proud of it. He always said he had his funeral planned, and David Rawls did a lot to help me on that day. And he said, "You're going to get a lot of good publicity out of this, Barbara," and we did. We got front page of all the Oklahoma papers, the Dallas paper. People sent me articles from all over the world, really, where they had ran about this circus funeral. But it was if a funeral can be wonderful, it was.